The Vorkai Empire had catalogued 412 sentient species across the known galaxy. They had conquered 280 of them. And of all those species, across every star system, every moon colony, every gas giant outpost, not a single one had made the Vorkai High Command laugh harder than the humans. Oh, the humans, yes. Those soft, squishy, embarrassingly fragile little creatures from the third rock orbiting a completely average yellow dwarf star. Fleet Commander Drav stood at the observation window of the command vessel Unyielding Dominion, staring down at the blue-green marble that his sensors were telling him was humanity's homeworld. His secondary eyes blinked slowly, his primary eyes narrowed. He clasped 3 of his 4 hands behind his back in the traditional Vorkai pose of absolute, unshakable superiority. So, he said, turning to his science officer, a lanky Vorkai named Yolt, whose entire career had been built on studying lesser species, "This is Earth." "Yes, Commander?" Yolt tapped his data tablet. "Nitrogen, oxygen, atmosphere, mostly water. Gravity at approximately 9.8 meters per second squared, and, well," he hesitated. Drav turned his full gaze on Yolt. "And? The inhabitants are... biologically, Commander, they are... quite soft." Drav blinked. "Soft?" "Yes, sir. No exoskeleton, no reinforced bone plating, no natural venom, no speed to speak of. Their claws, if you can even call them that, are made of a material called keratin, which I promise you is as threatening as it sounds." Yolt pulled up a holographic projection of a human hand. 5 digits. No ridges. No serration. Drav stared at the projection for a long moment. Then he laughed. It was a booming, 3-toned Vorkai laugh, the kind that rattles the internal organs of nearby smaller creatures. His entire bridge crew joined in. Even the maintenance drone in the corner seemed to vibrate with amusement. "Yolt," Drav said, wiping moisture from 2 of his eyes. "Are you telling me that these are the creatures who intercepted our automated probe 6 of their years ago, sent back a response in 12 of their languages, and had the absolute audacity to call themselves a Type 1 civilization on the rise?" "Yes, Commander. These soft, clawless, exoskeleton-free creatures?" "The very same." Drav shook his head. The briefing from Central Command had described humanity as a species worthy of formal assessment before conquest. Central Command had apparently flagged something in humanity's behavioral patterns as unusual. Drav had read the report with polite boredom. Something about endurance, something about adaptability, something about a psychological trait called stubbornness that the xenopsychology team had rated as, quote, statistically alarming. Drav had rated the xenopsychology team as statistically overcautious. "Prepare first contact protocol," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Standard terms: they surrender their planet, acknowledge Vorkai dominance, and we grant them the generosity of becoming a mid-tier labor species. Given their biology, I am thinking agricultural work, light lifting, perhaps some decorative duties." Yolt cleared his throat. "Sir, before we proceed, perhaps we should review the full biological assessment. There were some additional notes from Dr. Fenla's team that I did not get to read aloud, and she was quite insistent that they were relevant." "Yolt." "Yes, Commander." "How many species have we encountered that required more than a standard first contact protocol before submission?" Yolt thought about it. "None, sir." "How many of those species had exoskeletons? Venom glands? Reinforced skeletal structures?" "Most of them, sir." Drav spread all 4 of his hands wide in a gesture that meant the point was made. "Then I believe the species with the keratin fingernails will be fine. Open the communication channel. Down below, on the surface of that blue-green marble, in a low-orbit monitoring station orbiting at exactly 400 kilometers altitude, a human named Petra Adeyemi was doing what humans did best at 4 in the morning. She was drinking coffee, complaining, and absolutely refusing to go to sleep. Petra was 29 years old, a first contact specialist with the United Earth Orbital Response Division, and she had been awake for 19 consecutive hours because the alien vessel that had parked itself in geostationary orbit 16 hours ago had not done anything yet, and her supervisor had said, quote, "You are not leaving that station until they do something, Petra." Her supervisor was 600 kilometers away on solid ground. Petra had noted this difference in their circumstances with extreme personal resentment. "Bolin," she said to her colleague across the monitoring station, a tall, perpetually calm man named Bolin Marsh, who had the extraordinary ability to look completely unbothered by the presence of an alien warship directly above their heads. "They have been up there for 16 hours and done nothing. What are they doing?" "Probably assessing us. Bolin said, not looking up from his screen. For 16 hours? Maybe they are thorough. Maybe they are boring. And then the communication signal hit every receiver on the station simultaneously, and both of them sat up very, very straight. The voice that came through was translated by their onboard AI in real time, a technology humanity had built specifically for this moment, having spent 30 years preparing for first contact ever since the probe response. The translation was not perfect, but it was close enough. It said roughly the following: Inhabitants of the third planet, you are now under the formal notice of the Vorkai Empire. Resistance is not advisable. Submission is the recommended course of action. Your world will be assessed for resource value and labor classification within your next 48 planetary rotation cycles. Please acknowledge. Bolin looked at Petra. Petra looked at Bolin. They did not even say hello, Petra said. No. Bolin agreed. They did not ask our names. No, they did not introduce themselves properly. They did give a name. The Vorkai Empire. Bolin, they told us to submit before they said what they were submitting us for. That is poor communication strategy. Petra was already pulling up the response protocol. And they called us inhabitants. Not humanity, not a civilization. Inhabitants, like we are a weather pattern. Bolin, to his eternal credit, put down his coffee very carefully. Petra, this is a first contact scenario with a species that appears to have a warship in our orbit. Perhaps measured professionalism is warranted. Oh, I am going to be very professional, Petra said. Extremely professional. Watch. She pressed the transmission button. Vorkai vessel, she said, in her clearest, most composed voice. This is First Contact Specialist Petra Adeyemi of the United Earth Orbital Response Division. We have received your message. We acknowledge your presence. We do not acknowledge your terms. We would like to open formal diplomatic communication at your earliest convenience. Please advise on your preferred protocol for exchanges of this nature. Thank you. She released the button. Bolin stared at her. You said thank you. It is polite. You said thank you to an alien empire that just told us to surrender. If they are going to judge humanity on our first impression, Bolin, I am going to make sure the impression is that we have better manners than they do. Back on the unyielding Dominion, Fleet Commander Drav received Petra's response with the expression of a being who had just been handed a completely unexpected and mildly confusing gift. He played it back twice. Did she, he said slowly, say thank you? Yes, Commander, said Yolt. To us. Technically to you, sir. Or the vessel in general. The translation is slightly ambiguous. We told them to surrender their planet and they responded with a request for formal diplomatic protocol and said thank you. Yes, sir. Drave was quiet for a moment. He could not tell if this was the most pathetic thing he had ever encountered in 4 decades of conquest, or if something deeply strange was happening. Central Command's report floated back to him briefly. Stubbornness, behavioral patterns, statistically alarming. He pushed it aside. Respond, he said. Inform them that formal diplomatic exchange is unnecessary. Inform them that submission is not negotiable. And Yolt, make sure the tone is appropriately firm. I do not want there to be any confusion about the nature of this interaction. Yes, Commander. The message went down. Petra received it, read the translation, sighed, and said, They are really committed to this approach. Should we escalate to Command? Bolin asked. Command already knows. Half the world already knows. The signal was picked up globally about 40 minutes into the silence. Petra leaned back in her chair. Do you know what I keep thinking about, Bolin? What? They said resistance is not advisable, not impossible, not futile, not pointless. She looked at her coffee cup. Advisable, that is a very specific word choice. That means they think it is possible. They just think we should not do it. Bolin was quiet for a moment. That is actually a good observation, he said. I went to school for 9 years for this job, Bolin. I occasionally have good observations. Meanwhile, above them, Commander Drav had decided that enough communication had occurred. He turned to his tactical officer, a broad-shouldered Vorkai named Graz, who had the permanently hungry look of someone who had trained for combat since infancy and had not had a good fight in several planetary cycles. Graz, said Drav, prepare a landing assessment team. Small unit. 8 soldiers. We will set down near one of their larger population centers, demonstrate our capabilities, and encourage the inhabitants to reconsider their position on the submission matter. Graz smiled. It was not a warm smile. Which population center, sir? Drav looked at the planet below, pulled up a map, pointed to a continent. That one, he said. The large landmass. Put them down in the interior. Let them walk to the nearest city. It will give the humans time to see them coming and experience some anticipatory fear. Psychological preparation is an important part of conquest. Graz nodded and left to prepare his team. Yolt, still standing at his station, opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Commander," he said carefully, "I do wonder if perhaps we should review Dr. Fenla's additional notes before the landing team deploys. She was very specifically concerned about the planetary surface conditions and their effect on Vorkai physiology. She used the words moderately catastrophic, sir." Drav turned to look at Yolt with the patient expression of a commander who was beginning to suspect that his science officer had developed some kind of irrational fear response. "Yolt," he said. "Yes, Commander? The planet's gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared." "Yes, sir." "Vorkai's standard gravity is 6.1 meters per second squared." "Yes, sir." "So yes, our soldiers will feel it. They have trained under increased gravity simulations before. It is uncomfortable. It is not catastrophic." Dr. Fenla's concern was less about the gravity itself, sir, and more about the cumulative effect combined with the atmospheric pressure, the temperature variance, and the solar radiation levels at that particular continent's interior region, which is apparently quite far from any water source and quite exposed to the local star. "And the humidity level is—" Yolt checked his tablet. "The humidity level at the selected drop point is currently 91%, Commander. At 38 degrees in Celsius equivalent, under 1.6 Vorkai standard gravity." There was a silence on the bridge. Graz, who had paused in the doorway, slowly turned around. Drave looked at the planet, looked at Yolt, looked at the planet again. "The humans," he said flatly, "live in that, voluntarily, sir. There are over 40 million of them in that region alone." Another silence. "They chose," said Drav, "to build 40 million lives in that environment." "They also," said Yolt very quietly, "apparently play competitive sports in it." Drav stared at him. Yolt held up his data tablet showing a human athletic event from the interior continent. Humans, running, in that gravity, in that heat, in that humidity, voluntarily, for recreation. Drav said nothing for a very long time, and then, for the first time in his career, Fleet Commander Drav of the Vorkai Empire felt something he was not used to feeling. He felt the first, very faint whisper of something that was not quite doubt. Not quite worry, but it was definitely, absolutely, undeniably in the same neighborhood. "Change the landing coordinates," he said. "Put them somewhere cooler." The landing coordinates were changed to somewhere cooler. Graz had picked a wide, flat stretch of land in the northern hemisphere. Green, temperate, a gentle breeze according to the atmospheric sensors. Gravity still brutal by Vorkai standards, yes, but manageable, survivable. The kind of environment where 8 of the finest Vorkai soldiers in the fleet could step out, look intimidating, and make the locals reconsider their very reasonable options regarding submission. That was the plan. The plan lasted approximately 4 minutes after touchdown. Private Vek, who was the youngest member of the landing team and also, by general consensus, the most physically impressive Vorkai soldier on the entire vessel, stepped off the landing ramp, stood up to his full height of 2.4 meters, squared his reinforced shoulders, and immediately felt the planet trying to kill him, not dramatically. Not with fire or explosion or any of the satisfying violence that Vorkai soldiers trained for. No, the planet tried to kill him the way a bully tries to kill confidence. Quietly, persistently, without a single moment of rest. Every step was heavier than the last. His suit, which weighed 40 kilograms on the ship, felt like it had gained a passenger. His neck, trained and strong, was having a polite but urgent conversation with his skull about the sustainability of holding his head upright. His lungs, designed for the thinner, cooler air of Vorkai homeworlds, were working harder than they had any right to be. He looked to his left. Sergeant Orak, a 20-year veteran of the Vorkai army, was walking with the subtle grimace of a being who refused to show pain but whose body had not received that memo. He looked to his right. Combat Specialist Devine was breathing through her nose very carefully, the way someone breathes when they are pretending they are not breathing hard. Nobody said anything, because they were Vorkai, and Vorkai soldiers did not complain. They walked. 1 kilometer. 2. 3. By kilometer 4, Vek had silently revised his personal definition of suffering. "Contact ahead," said Orak, and his voice only cracked a little. "Humans, 2 of them." The team stopped. They raised their weapons, standard Vorkai pulse rifles, which in this gravity felt roughly equivalent to carrying a small vehicle. They stood in their best intimidating formation. The 2 humans ahead of them, walking a large 4-legged animal on a rope, stopped and stared. One of them was an older man. White hair, worn boots, a hat so wide it was practically a personal weather system. The other was a younger woman, maybe 30, with her hair pulled back, wearing clothes that had clearly survived significant outdoor use. The older man looked at 8 armed alien soldiers standing in his field. He looked at them for a long moment. Then he turned to the younger woman and said something. The translation device that Vec carried picked it up and processed it in real time. The old man had said, "Reckon those are the aliens they were talking about on the radio?" The younger woman said, "Looks like it." The old man nodded slowly. They looked tired, and then, because apparently this was simply the nature of humanity, the old man raised his hand in a wave and said to the 8 armed alien soldiers who had just descended from an empire that controlled 280 conquered worlds, "You boys all right? You need some water?" Vec stared. Aurak stared. Devine, who had been holding her intimidating combat stance for 4 kilometers of agony, slowly lowered her weapon 3 centimeters without realizing she had done it. The Vorkai soldiers had rehearsed many responses to many situations. They had trained for aggression, they had trained for panic, they had trained for desperate, futile resistance from frightened populations. Nobody had trained them for hospitality. Aurak, in the grand tradition of military leadership, defaulted to protocol. "We are soldiers of the Vorkai Empire," he announced, in his best commanding voice, which was still quite impressive even if his knees were making a quiet sound they had not made before today. "We are here as a demonstration of Vorkai military capability. Your world has been given formal notice of imperial assessment. We are here to encourage compliance." The old man listened to the translation device on Aurak's belt produce this speech. Then he pushed his enormous hat up slightly and said, "Son, you came all the way from space to stand in my field and encourage compliance?" "Yes." "On a Wednesday?" Aurak had no frame of reference for Wednesday. His translator offered no cultural context. He said, "The day of the week is not relevant to the message." "Fair enough," said the old man. He looked them over again with the calm, evaluating eyes of someone who had spent a lifetime reading weather and animals and situations. "How long have you been walking?" "That information is not relevant." "You're sweating through your suits?" "That's relevant." There was a pause. Because he was right. The temperature regulation systems in Vorkai combat armor were designed for Vorkai standard environments. They were not designed for Earth. They were losing the argument. "We are fine," said Aurak. "Uh-huh," said the old man, with the tone of a person who has heard that exact phrase from every young, stubborn creature he has ever encountered and has never once believed it. He turned to the woman and said something quickly. She nodded and walked back toward a structure in the distance. "She is going for water," the old man said. "Do your suits drink water or do you drink it yourselves?" Aurak opened his mouth, closed it. "Ourselves," he said. "All right then." Up on the unyielding Dominion, Commander Drav was watching the helmet feed from Aurak's suit with an expression that had moved through several stages of emotion in the last few minutes. It had started at supreme confidence, traveled through mild confusion, passed through genuine bafflement, and was currently sitting in a strange, uncomfortable territory that Drav had not visited since he was a young officer making his first mistakes. "Yolt?" he said. "Yes, Commander? The humans are offering our soldiers water." "Yes, sir." "Our soldiers, who arrived as an occupying demonstration force." "Yes, sir." "And Aurak is he accepting it?" Yolt checked the feed. "It appears he is considering it, sir. The atmospheric conditions on the surface are quite severe for Vorkai physiology. Dehydration would become a medical concern within the next—" "That is not the point, Yolt." "I understand, sir, but from a survival standpoint, the point is that this is not how conquered populations behave. They are supposed to be frightened. They are supposed to be scrambling for emergency communications with their leaders. They are supposed to be experiencing the psychological weight of an overwhelming superior force arriving in their midst." Drav gestured at the feed with 2 of his hands. "They are not supposed to be offering refreshments." Yolt looked at the feed. He looked at Drav. He said, very carefully, the thing he had been wanting to say for the past several hours. "Commander, perhaps this would be a good moment to read Dr. Fenla's additional notes." Drav looked at him for a long, proud, stubborn second. Then he sat down. "Read them to me," he said. Yolt picked up his tablet. "Dr. Fenla's assessment begins as follows," he said. "Humans are, biologically, a prey species that became an apex predator. This is not common. Most apex predators in the known galaxy evolved as predators from the beginning and developed intelligence secondarily. Humans reversed this. They were, for a significant portion of their evolutionary history, being hunted. Their response to this was not to develop armor, venom, or physical size. Their response was to develop endurance, pattern recognition, social cooperation, and an almost pathological refusal to accept situations as permanent." Drav said nothing. Yolt continued. "Humans can run. Not fast. In fact, by galactic standards, they are quite slow at sprint speed. However, humans are the only known species on their planet capable of running long distances in heat through a physiological process called persistence hunting, in which they do not run faster than their prey, they simply run longer until the prey collapses from exhaustion. There is no known upper limit that has been scientifically confirmed for how far a trained human can run before stopping. They run races of 42 kilometers recreationally. They run races of 100 kilometers competitively. Some individuals run in excess of 250 kilometers in a single event. Drav was very still. Additionally, Yolt said, and his voice had taken on the tone of someone reading a document that was becoming increasingly concerning the further they went. Humans have a relationship with pain that our xenopsychology team describes as, quote, complicated. They do not enjoy pain. However, they have developed cultural, psychological, and physiological mechanisms to continue functioning under pain levels that would incapacitate most known sentient species. They have a phrase for this. The phrase is, and I am reading the translation directly, push through it. The concept of pushing through pain or exhaustion is not merely accepted in human culture. It is celebrated. Statues are built to it. Songs are written about it. Their young are taught it as a virtue. Drav slowly turned to look at the blue-green marble outside his observation window. Furthermore, Yolt said, and now he was reading faster because the notes kept going and each one was worse than the last. Humans operate under gravity, atmospheric pressure, and solar radiation conditions that are, by Vorkai physiological standards, classified as an extreme environment. They are not aware of this. They consider their environment normal. They vacation in environments that are significantly more extreme than their standard living conditions. For recreation, they climb their planet's highest mountains, which have atmospheric oxygen levels incompatible with unassisted Vorkai breathing, and they do this without being ordered to. Their oceans, which cover 70% of their surface, have pressure levels at depth that would destroy Vorkai combat equipment. Humans go there on purpose, with gear they built themselves, to look at things. The bridge was very quiet. The behavioral flag in the assessment summary, Yolt said, reaching the final section, is as follows. Humans do not respond to threats the way prey species respond to threats. They do not scatter. They do not immediately submit. The most consistent documented human response to an overwhelming threat is a period of assessment, followed by either negotiation or adaptation. In every historical case where humans faced a force significantly stronger than themselves, they did one of two things. They talked until they found an advantage, or they endured until the advantage found them. In no documented historical case did humans as a species simply stop. Yolt lowered the tablet. The silence on the bridge of the unyielding dominion was the kind of silence that arrives when an idea you were very comfortable with has just packed its belongings and left the building. Drav stared at the planet. Then his communication board lit up. It was the channel from the surface. From Aurak. Drav pressed the receive button. Aurak's voice came through. It was composed, professional, but there was something underneath it that Drav had never heard in Aurak's voice in 20 years of service. Commander, said Aurak, I need to report a development. Go ahead. We are currently seated in the residence of the two humans we encountered. They have provided water and a substance they call tea, which I cannot identify, but which Devine has now had 2 cups of. A pause. That is not the development. Then what is? While we were walking here, we passed a structure on the edge of the property, a large open structure with equipment inside. The old human showed it to us on the way in. Commander, the equipment was for physical training. So? Commander, the weights in that structure, the resistance equipment, the loads on the machines. Aurak's voice dropped slightly. I checked the calibrations against our standard scales. The old human, who is 63 years old by his own account, lifts weight in that structure every morning that would be considered a serious training load for a frontline Vorkai soldier. He does it at this gravity, at his age, before breakfast. A very long silence. And Commander, Aurak continued, I asked him about it. I asked him if it was difficult. He looked at me like I had said something slightly confusing, and then he said, and I am reading the translation directly, he said, you just get used to it. Drav closed his eyes. You just get used to it. You just get used to the gravity that was making his 8 best soldiers walk like they were carrying twice their body weight. You just get used to the heat that had forced a change in landing coordinates. You just get used to the world that had taken a prey species and turned it, quietly and without any fanfare, into something that ran for fun, lifted for recreation, climbed to the edge of breathable air on their days off, and offered water to occupying alien soldiers because it was simply the polite thing to do. Drav opened his eyes. He looked at Yolt. He looked at the planet. He thought about Petra Adeyemi. who had responded to a surrender demand with a request for proper diplomatic protocol and the words thank you. He thought about Orak, who had trained for 2 decades and was currently drinking tea in a stranger's house because his body had not been built for this world. He thought about the old man in the wide hat standing in his field on a Wednesday asking 8 armed alien soldiers if they needed water. He thought about persistence hunting. He thought about the word advisable, and then Commander Drav of the Vorkai Empire, conqueror of 280 worlds, did something he had never done in his career. He picked up the direct communication channel to Petra Adeyemi's station. First contact specialist Adeyemi, he said. There was a brief pause. Then Petra's voice came back, clear and steady. Commander, I was wondering when you would call. I would like, said Drav very carefully, to discuss the possibility of formal diplomatic communication. Another pause, shorter this time. I'll put the coffee on, said Petra, and 200 kilometers below, in a farmhouse kitchen on a completely average Wednesday, Sergeant Orak of the Vorkai Empire held a warm cup of tea in his aching hands, looked across the table at an old human man who lifted more than a soldier and asked no questions about it, and understood, with the slow, certain clarity of a being whose assumptions have just been permanently reorganized, that the Vorkai Empire had made a very specific kind of mistake. They had looked at something soft and decided it was weak. Those 2 words, as it turned out, were not the same thing at all. They never had been. And somewhere in the history of every species the Vorkai had ever conquered, perhaps the answer had always been there, if anyone had bothered to check. Earth had just been the first place to say it out loud. With tea, on a Wednesday,